There are moments when one choice changes everything forever. For 68-year-old Hank, that moment came on a cold October night at the abandoned Millfield Station. He had been living under the station's broken awning for 3 months, forgotten by the world like the rusted tracks beside him. Through the pouring rain, he saw a small bundle on the platform that made his heart stop. A little girl, no older than 7, lay unconscious on the concrete, her lips blue with cold. Hank had nothing, just a threadbare blanket and half a stale sandwich. But he wrapped her in his only protection from the elements and held her close, through the night. What would drive a man who had lost everything to give his last bit of warmth to save a stranger's child? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Millfield Station had been dying for 15 years, but Hank understood dying things. He'd watched his wife Margaret slip away in that sterile hospital room, watched his construction business crumble when his back gave out, watched his daughter, Sarah, turn her face away the last time he'd knocked on her door, with empty pockets and whiskey on his breath. Now he watched this forgotten place, where trains once carried dreams to distant cities, where families once embraced on platforms that now hosted only pigeons and broken glass. The faded schedule board still hung on the east wall, its metal frame, rusted at the edges, but somehow defiant. Chicago Express, 7:15 a.m., it proclaimed to no one. Pittsburgh Local, 3:42 p.m. Times that would never come again, destinations that existed now only in memory. Hank had studied that board during countless sleepless nights, imagining the lives that once hurried beneath it. Young soldiers heading home from war, mothers clutching children close on their way to new beginnings, old men like himself, though back then he'd been young and certain the world owed him something. The girl, Emma, she'd whispered her name just as dawn broke, stirred in his arms as the first grey light filtered through the station's broken windows. She couldn't have weighed more than 50 pounds soaking wet, which she had been when he found her. Her dark hair, now dry, fell in tangled waves across shoulders too thin for a child who should have been worrying about spelling tests and playground games. Hank had learned patience in his 68 years. Patience when Margaret's cancer treatments stretched from months to years. Patience when potential employers saw his age before his experience. Patience when the shelter beds filled up and winter nights seemed endless. So he waited as Emma's eyes fluttered open, as consciousness returned to her small face, as memory of where she was and who he was settled into recognition rather than fear. "Are you hungry?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. He'd spoken more words to this child in 12 hours than he'd spoken to another human being in weeks. Emma's nod came slowly, tentatively. Her eyes, large and brown, and far too knowing for 7 years, studied his weathered face as if memorizing every line. Hank reached into his backpack, a faded green army surplus bag that had seen better decades, and withdrew the other half of his sandwich, bologna and mustard on day-old bread from the discount rack, a feast for kings by his current standards. She ate with the careful deliberation of someone who'd known hunger, small bites chewed thoroughly, nothing wasted. Hank watched her and saw something of himself in that carefulness, the way poverty taught you to savor what you had because you never knew when you'd have it again. The station around them told its own story of abandonment. Wooden benches, their green paint peeling like old skin, sat empty in rows. The ticket window, boarded up with plywood, still bore the ghost outline of posted schedules and fare information. Weeds pushed through cracks in the platform concrete, nature's slow reclamation of what man had left behind. But there was dignity in the bones of the place still, in the solid brick construction and high ceilings that spoke of an era when traveling was an occasion, when arrival somewhere meant something. "My mama used to bring me here," Emma said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Before the trains stopped, she said we might take a trip someday." Hank felt something tighten in his chest. "What happened to your mama?" "She went away," Emma's fingers traced patterns on the concrete floor. Sometimes people just go away. He understood that language, the careful words children used to make sense of adult failures. Sarah had used similar words when her mother died, when Hank's drinking had made him go away too, even when he was sitting right there in the same room. The morning brought other signs of life to their forgotten corner of the world. Mrs. Chen emerged from the corner store across the street, sweeping the sidewalk in front of her shop with methodical strokes. She'd nodded to Hank a few times over the past months, one of the few people who acknowledged his existence without judgment or fear. Her grandson David sometimes helped her with the heavy inventory, a quiet boy who reminded Hank of himself at that age, watchful, responsible beyond his years. "That lady sells newspapers," Hank told Emma, pointing toward the store, "and candy bars. Hot coffee too, though I haven't had money for coffee in a while." Emma followed his gaze but said nothing. Trust was still fragile between them, built on one night of shared warmth and the simple fact that he hadn't hurt her when he could have. Hank knew that feeling, the careful testing of new ground, the readiness to run if kindness proved to be a trap. The day progressed, with the slow rhythm of people who had nowhere urgent to be. Hank showed Emma the small treasures he'd discovered in his months at the station. A family of sparrows that nested in the eaves, returning each morning with mathematical precision. A section of platform where the afternoon sun hit just right, warm enough to nap if the weather cooperated. The bathroom that still had running water, cold but clean, a luxury many people took for granted. "Were you ever scared?" Emma asked as they watched the sparrows. "Of what?" "Of being alone." Hank considered the question with the weight it deserved. "Every day," he admitted. "But you know what I learned? Being alone and being lonely aren't the same thing. I was lonelier in my own house with people who knew my name than I am out here with folks who don't." Emma processed this with the seriousness of someone much older. "I was scared when I was alone last night, before you found me. What made you less scared? You stayed, even when it was cold and you only had one blanket. There it was, the simple truth that adults often complicated. Sometimes staying was enough. Sometimes the choice to remain present, to bear witness to someone else's fear, mattered more than having solutions or answers." As afternoon shadows stretched across the platform, Emma began to tell him fragments of her story. A mother who loved, but couldn't keep her safe. Foster homes that felt like waiting rooms. Adults who made promises they didn't keep. A system designed to help children that sometimes lost track of which children needed helping. Hank listened without trying to fix anything, a skill he'd learned too late in his marriage, but early enough perhaps to matter now. Emma's words painted a picture of a little girl who'd learned to pack light because moving was always temporary, who'd learned to sleep quietly because drawing attention was dangerous, who'd learned to run when staying became impossible. "Why did you help me?" she asked as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Hank was quiet for a long moment, watching the light change colors on the station walls. "I had a daughter once," he said finally. "If she'd ever been lost and scared and alone somewhere, I'd have wanted someone to find her, someone to stay with her until it was safe again. Where is she now?" "She went away too." Emma nodded with understanding beyond her years. In their small circle of shared abandonment, explanations weren't always necessary. Sometimes the fact that someone else knew what missing felt like was comfort enough. As evening approached and Hank prepared their makeshift camp for another night, he realized something had shifted in the few hours since Emma had awakened. The station felt less like a place where broken things came to wait for endings, and more like a place where broken things might learn to heal. Not because the building had changed, but because having someone to protect had given him a reason to see possibility instead of just shelter. Emma curled up against his side as darkness settled over their forgotten corner of the world, her trust, a weight he hadn't carried in years. Above them, the faded schedule board caught the last of the day's light. Its impossible promises of destinations and departures reading now less like lies and more like hope deferred. Grandpa Hank, Emma murmured. As sleep claimed her, he hadn't corrected her. Somehow, in the space of one night and one day, he'd become exactly what she'd named him. 3 days passed before Hank admitted to himself that no one was coming for Emma. He'd watched the road that led to the station, listened for sirens or search parties, scanned the faces of the few people who passed by for signs of recognition or urgency. Nothing. The world had seemingly misplaced a 7-year-old girl and hadn't noticed. Emma's torn dress told a story he didn't want to read. The fabric was good quality once, a soft blue cotton with small white flowers, but now it bore stains that spoke of rough handling and hurried escapes. A pocket hung half-ripped from the seam. The hem was muddied and torn, as if she'd crawled, or been dragged through something unforgiving. "Emma," he said gently on that third morning, as she picked at the breakfast he'd managed to buy with coins found in the station's forgotten corners. "Do you remember the people who were supposed to take care of you before you came here?" Her small hands stilled on the granola bar. "The Millers. And where do the Millers live?" "Oakwood Street. The blue house with white shutters." Her voice carried the mechanical precision of a child who'd memorized important information for survival. Hank felt his stomach tighten. She remembered clearly, which meant her presence here wasn't confusion or being lost. It was flight. Did something happen at the blue house, Emma? She set down the granola bar and pulled her knees to her chest, a small fortress against unwanted memories. Mr. Miller said, "If I told anyone about the games we played, no one would believe me because I was just a foster kid who lies." The words hit Hank like a physical blow. In his construction days, he'd worked alongside men who talked casually about violence against those who hurt children. He'd never understood their rage until this moment, when his own hands shook with the desire to find Mr. Miller and explain some things about games and children and consequences. "Emma, honey, those weren't games. What Mr. Miller did to you, that was wrong, very wrong, and people will believe you." Her brown eyes, too old for her face, met his with skepticism earned through bitter experience. "The social worker said the Millers were good people. She said I was lucky they wanted me." "What's the social worker's name?" "Miss Johnson. But she's got lots of kids to worry about. She said I should try harder to fit in." Hank had to turn away for a moment, ostensibly to check the weather, but really to compose himself. The casual cruelty of a system that prioritized placement over protection made his chest burn with familiar rage. The same helpless fury he'd felt when hospital administrators had talked about Margaret's quality of life while she was still. "Fighting to live. We're going to call Miss Johnson," he said finally, "and we're going to tell her exactly what happened at the Blue House." But the payphone outside Chen's Market ate his quarters without connecting the call. The library was closed for renovations. Mrs. Chen let him use her phone, speaking gently to Emma in what sounded like Mandarin, while Hank navigated an automated system that transferred him 3 times before disconnecting. When he finally reached a human voice at social services, the conversation felt like swimming upstream through bureaucracy. "I'm calling about Emma Rodriguez," he said. "She's been reported missing from her foster placement." "Are you family?" "No, I found her. She's safe, but she's told me some concerning things about her foster father." "Sir, I'll need to transfer you to our emergency line. Can you hold?" He held for 17 minutes before the line went dead. His second attempt reached a different person who asked the same questions and transferred him to yet another department. This time, Emma tugged on his sleeve. "They won't believe you either," she said quietly. "Adults think kids make up stories." But Hank persisted, driven by a determination that had been dormant for too many years. On his 4th call, he reached Sarah Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen at the market, a social worker who listened without interrupting and asked the right questions. "Where are you now?" Sarah asked. "The old Millfield Station. We've been staying here. And you said Emma disclosed inappropriate contact from her foster father?" "Yes. She's been hurt, Miss Chen, really hurt." A pause. "I'm sorry, what's your name?" "Hank Morrison. Mr. Morrison, I need you to bring Emma to our office immediately. We take these allegations very seriously. Hope flickered in Hank's chest. What's the address? But when they arrived at the county building 2 hours later, Sarah Chen turned out to be a young woman barely out of college. Overwhelmed and drowning in case files stacked like small mountains on her desk. Her sincerity was genuine, but her power was limited. Emma, Sarah said, kneeling to the girl's level, can you tell me about Mr. Miller? Emma's response was a single word, delivered like a stone dropping into still water. Please! It was the first word she'd spoken to Hank 3 nights ago, and it carried the same desperate weight now. Please don't make me remember. Please don't. Send me back. Please don't let this happen again. Sarah's expression darkened with understanding. She'd heard that word before, in that tone, from other children in similar circumstances. Emma, you're safe here. Mr. Morrison brought you here because he wants to protect you. Is that right, honey? Emma nodded, her small hand finding Hank's weathered one. Mr. Morrison, Sarah said, rising, I need to ask you some questions privately. They stepped into the hallway, where Sarah's professional composure cracked slightly. How did you find her? She was unconscious at the train station. Cold, soaked through. I kept her warm until she woke up. And she told you about the foster father. Not directly at first, but the signs were there. She's scared, Miss Chen, really scared. Sarah nodded. I believe you, and I believe her. But the system... She gestured helplessly at the chaos visible through her office window. We're understaffed, underfunded, and the Millers have been approved foster parents for 8 years. Their file shows successful placements. Their file is wrong. I know. But proving that takes time, and in the meantime, you want to send her back to the man who hurt her? No. Sarah's voice was firm. I want to find her emergency placement while we investigate, but that could take days, maybe weeks. And honestly, Mr. Morrison, emergency placements aren't always better than what she's running from. Hank felt the walls of bureaucracy closing around them, the same suffocating maze that had defeated him when Margaret needed experimental treatments their insurance wouldn't cover, when his business needed just one more loan to survive the recession. What if she stays with me? Sarah's eyebrows rose. You're not a licensed foster parent. You're homeless, Mr. Morrison. No offense, but none taken. I know what I am, but I also know what I'm not. I'm not someone who hurts children. I believe that, but the system requires... The system failed her, Hank interrupted. The system placed her with someone who hurt her, ignored her when she tried to tell the truth, and lost track of her when she ran away. Maybe it's time to consider that the system isn't working. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Her young face weighted with decisions that had no good options. Through the office window they could see Emma sitting in a chair, too big for her, swinging her legs nervously. Give me 48 hours, Sarah said finally. I'll open an investigation into the Miller placement and try to find somewhere safe. For Emma, can you keep her that long? As long as she needs. Mr. Morrison, Hank, you understand that you're taking a risk here. If something happens to her while she's with you, if the Millers press charges for taking her across state lines or interfering with a placement... Miss Chen, Hank said, his voice steady with resolve he hadn't felt in years. Yesterday I was a homeless old man waiting to die. Today I'm someone a little girl calls Grandpa. Which one of those sounds like a risk worth taking? They returned to the office, where Emma looked up at them with the anxious expression of someone whose fate was being decided by others again. Emma, Sarah said gently, would you like to stay with Hank while I find you a safe place to live? The girl's face transformed, relief flooding her features like sunrise after a long night. She nodded emphatically. But you have to promise me something, Sarah continued. If anything scary happens, if anyone tries to hurt you or take you somewhere, you don't want to go, you call me immediately. She handed Emma a card with her direct number. Can you promise me that? I promise. As they walked back toward the station, Emma's hand secure in his, Hank realized that somewhere in the space of 3 days, he'd stopped being a man with nothing to lose and become a man with everything to protect. The weight of that responsibility should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like the first purposeful thing he'd done in years. "Grandpa Hank," Emma said as they neared their makeshift home. "Yes, sweetheart. Thank you for staying." He squeezed her small hand gently. "Thank you for letting me." Emma's recovery wasn't linear. Some mornings she woke with curiosity bright in her eyes, asking questions about the sparrows or helping Hank organize his few possessions. Other days she retreated into herself, speaking only when necessary and startling at sudden noises. The screech of brakes from the highway, footsteps on the platform, even her own shadow moving unexpectedly. On the good days, Hank learned pieces of who she was beneath the trauma. She was left-handed, but had been forced to write with her right hand at school. She knew the names of 17 different wildflowers because her mother had taught her to identify them on walks through the county park. She could count to 50 in Spanish and sang herself to sleep with lullabies in both languages, her voice soft as whispered prayers. "My mama worked at the hospital," she told him one afternoon, as they shared a bag of peanuts Mrs. Chen had given them. "She cleaned the rooms at night so the sick people would have everything nice in the morning. That's important work," Hanky said. "My wife Margaret spent a lot of time in hospitals. The people who made things clean and comfortable, they were angels to us." Emma considered this. Mama said angels were just people who paid attention to other people's needs. The wisdom of children raised by working mothers struck Hank silent for a moment. Margaret would have liked this little girl, he realized, would have seen the steel beneath her gentleness, the way she noticed everything and forgot nothing. It was on a Tuesday, 6 days after he'd found her, that Emma showed him what she carried in the small backpack that had been clutched against her chest when he discovered her on the platform. Inside the faded purple bag were treasures that told the story of a life interrupted. A stuffed elephant with one ear loved to thinness, $3.47 in crumpled bills and coins, a school photo of a woman with Emma's eyes and smile, and a child's drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. "That's me and Mama," she said, pointing to the drawing. "I made it for Mother's Day, but she was already gone when the day came." Hank studied the woman in the photograph, young, tired around the eyes, but smiling genuinely at the camera. She wore scrubs, and her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. There was something familiar about her expression, a look he recognized from his own mirror during the hardest years. The face of someone carrying more than their share, but carrying it anyway. "She looks like she loved you very much." She did, but loving someone doesn't always mean you get to keep them safe. The truth of it hit Hank like a physical weight. He'd loved Margaret fiercely, but cancer hadn't cared. He'd loved his daughter Sarah, but his drinking had built walls that love alone couldn't breach. He'd even loved his business, the satisfaction of building something solid and lasting, but economic forces beyond his control had crushed it anyway. "No," he said quietly. "Sometimes it doesn't, but that doesn't make the love less real." Emma nodded with the grave understanding of someone who'd learned early that the world wasn't fair, but that fairness wasn't the only thing that mattered. That evening, as they settled into their routine, Emma curled against his side, the threadbare blanket wrapped around both of them. Hank reached for his wallet. The leather was cracked and worn smooth in places, and he'd carried it so long that its contents had become part of him, forgotten unless specifically needed. Behind his expired driver's license and a library card from a library that no longer existed, he found what he was looking for. A photograph of Sarah at age 9, gap-toothed and grinning, her arms wrapped around the neck of their golden retriever, Buddy. The picture had been taken in their backyard in Millbrook, back when they'd had a backyard, back when Sunday mornings meant pancakes and cartoon marathons, and the biggest worry was whether it would rain during the Little League game. "This is my daughter," he said, showing Emma the photo. "Her name is Sarah. She'd be about 32 now." Emma studied the picture with the intensity she brought to everything important. "She looks happy." She was. We all were for a while. "What happened?" Hank was quiet for so long that Emma began to think he hadn't heard the question. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of years. I made mistakes, big ones. When her mother got sick, I started drinking to make the fear go away. But the drinking made everything else go away too. My judgment, my patience, my ability to be the father she needed. By the time Margaret died, Sarah was taking care of both of us, and she was only 14. Did she go away like my mama? Different. But yes, she went to live with her aunt when she turned 16, said she couldn't watch me destroy myself anymore. And she was right. I kept drinking for another 10 years before I lost everything else too. Emma was quiet, processing this information with her characteristic seriousness. Do you think she still loves you? The question he'd been afraid to ask himself, spoken with the directness that only children possessed. I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so. But I hurt her badly. Sometimes when you hurt someone enough, even love isn't enough to fix it. But you stopped drinking? Eventually. Too late for a lot of things, but I stopped. Maybe it's not too late for her. Hank felt something shift in his chest, a door opening that he'd kept locked for years. Maybe not. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who understood loss and regret, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky above the station. The night sounds were familiar now. Distant traffic, the settling of old wood and brick, the soft rustle of the sparrows in their nests. Grandpa Hank? Yes? When Miss Sarah finds me a place to live, will I still be able to see you? The question he'd been dreading. The one that kept him awake even after Emma's breathing had settled into the rhythm of sleep. He'd known from the beginning that this arrangement was temporary, that his role was to keep her safe until the system could provide something better. But knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally were different creatures entirely. I hope so, Emma. I really hope so. I hope so too, because you're the first grown-up who ever kept a promise to me. What promise was that? You promised to stay. And you did. She was asleep within minutes, her small body warm against his side, her trust a gift he hadn't earned but was determined to deserve. Hank remained awake long into the night, staring up at the old schedule board and thinking about promises and second chances, about the difference between loving someone and being able to protect them, about the strange ways that losing everything could sometimes help you find what truly mattered. In his wallet, behind Sarah's photograph, was his old business card, Morrison Construction, building dreams, one foundation at a time. The slogan had seemed meaningful once, before he understood that some dreams crumbled despite the strongest foundations, that some things were built to last, and others were built to teach you how to rebuild. But maybe, he thought, as Emma stirred in her sleep and whispered something that sounded like Mama. Maybe the lesson wasn't about building things that never fell down. Maybe it was about learning to build again after everything collapsed, about finding the courage to lay new foundations, even when you knew how easily they could be lost. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Sarah Chen would call with updates. On the investigation, Mrs. Chen would nod at them from across the street with increasing concern in her eyes. Emma would wake with questions he might not know how to answer. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary of their abandoned station, Hank Morrison was exactly where he needed to be, keeping watch over someone who needed watching, fulfilling a promise that mattered, building something that felt like hope from the broken pieces of two discarded lives. Sarah Chen called on Thursday morning, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd spent 2 sleepless nights making phone calls and filing reports. Emma was feeding breadcrumbs to the sparrows when Hank answered Mrs. Chen's phone, watching the birds with the focused attention of someone learning to find joy in small certainties. "I've got good news and complicated news," Sarah said without preamble. "Which do you want first?" "The good news." Emma could use some. "The investigation is moving faster than I expected. I interviewed 3 other children who were placed with the Millers over the past 2 years. Emma wasn't their only victim." Hank felt his grip tighten on the phone. And the complicated news? Mike Miller is fighting the removal order. He's hired a lawyer, and he's claiming Emma ran away because she was acting out and making false accusations for attention. His wife is backing his story. What does that mean for Emma? It means this is going to take longer than 48 hours. The court wants a full investigation before they'll terminate his foster license. In the meantime, Emma needs temporary placement. Through the store window, Hank watched Emma coax a particularly bold sparrow to eat from her palm. The trust required. For that simple interaction, bird approaching human, vulnerability meeting gentleness, seemed miraculous and fragile. What are the options? Honestly, not great. The county emergency shelter is overcrowded and understaffed. There's a group home in Riverside, but they're dealing with some behavioral issues that might not be appropriate for a child Emma's age. And there's the Hendersons. They're licensed for emergency placement, but they've got 4 other foster children right now. Each option sounded like a different version of institutional care, well-meaning but impersonal, staffed by people who'd see Emma as a case file rather than a little girl who sang herself to sleep and knew the names of wildflowers. What if she stays here with me a little longer? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Hank, I want to help, but you're asking me to bend rules that exist for good reasons. You're not background checked, you're not licensed, and you're homeless. I know what I am, Miss Chen. That's not what I was going to say. You're unvetted by the system. For all I know, you could be like Mike Miller. I didn't say that. But you thought it, and you're right to think it. Any reasonable person would. Hank watched Emma through the window, her small face lit with delight as a second sparrow joined the first. But here's what I know that your system doesn't. That little girl calls me Grandpa, and she sleeps through the night for the first time since I found her. She eats when I give her food. She talks about her mama without crying, and she's learning to trust again. How many of your approved placements can promise her that? It's not about promises, Hank. It's about protocols and safety measures, and it's about bureaucracy covering its ass while children suffer. The words came out harsher than he'd intended. I'm sorry. I know you're trying to help. I am. And I know you care about her. But caring isn't enough when the courts get involved. I need documentation, home studies, references. What kind of references? Character witnesses. People who can vouch for your stability, your history with children, your trustworthiness. Hank almost laughed at the impossibility of it. Who would vouch for a homeless man, Mrs. Chen, who'd been kind but barely knew him, his daughter Sarah, who hadn't spoken to him in 12 years, the handful of former employees who might remember him if they were still alive and could be tracked down? How long do I have? The emergency order expires Monday. After that, Emma goes into the system whether we found her a good placement or not. 4 days, 96 hours to figure out how a man with nothing could prove he was worthy of protecting someone precious. Miss Chen, Sarah, can I ask you something? Of course. In your professional opinion, what happens to children like Emma in the system? Long term, I mean. Sarah was quiet for so long that Hank thought the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much. The ones who make it out okay usually had someone along the way who saw them as more than a case file. Someone who remembered their favorite color, or the way they liked their sandwiches cut, or the fact that they were afraid of thunderstorms. Someone who stayed. And the ones who don't make it out okay, they age out at 18 with a garbage bag full of possessions and no real preparation for independence. They end up homeless, addicted, in abusive relationships, or dead. The statistics are ugly, Hank. Then help me be someone who stays. I'm trying, but I need you to help me too. Do you have any documentation of employment, previous addresses, anything that establishes a history of stability? Hank thought about the boxes of paperwork he'd abandoned when he lost the house. Tax records, business licenses, certificates of completion for safety courses, testimonials from satisfied customers. All of it probably destroyed by now, thrown away by whoever had cleaned out his foreclosed home. I might have some things. Give me until tomorrow. Okay. And Hank? Start thinking about who might speak for you. I know it seems impossible, but sometimes impossible things happen when they need to. After he hung up, Hank walked outside to where Emma was still communing with the sparrows. She looked up at him with eyes that had learned to read adult faces for signs of impending change. Was that Miss Sarah? Yes. Am I leaving? The direct question deserved a direct answer. Not today. Maybe not for a few days. But Emma, we need to talk about what happens next. She stood slowly, brushing breadcrumbs from her hands with the careful precision she brought to everything. I know. Things don't last forever. Some things do. Some things last longer than we expect. Like what? Hank knelt to her eye level, his arthritic knees protesting against the concrete. Like the way your mama taught you about wildflowers. That's still with you, isn't it? Emma nodded. Like the way these sparrows have learned to trust you. They'll remember your kindness, even when you're not here to feed them. But I'll still have to go, probably. But that doesn't mean this. He gestured to encompass the station. The morning light, the birds still gathered hopefully around their feet, disappears. It becomes part of who you are. And I become part of who you are, and you're already part of who I am. She considered this with her characteristic seriousness. Will you try to find me after? Like in the movies, where the people who love each other find each other again, if you want me to. If it's allowed, if it's what's best for you, I want you to, then I will. It was a promise that might prove impossible to keep, but it was also the only promise that mattered. Emma seemed to understand the weight of it, nodding with satisfaction before returning her attention to the sparrows. That afternoon, while Emma napped in the shade of the station's overhang, Hank began the seemingly impossible task of reconstructing a life on paper. He walked to the library branch that had reopened after renovations, where a young librarian helped him access computer terminals and search databases for traces of his former existence. Morrison Construction had been dissolved 8 years ago, but there were still records in the Better Business Bureau files, tax documents archived by the county, even a few online reviews from customers who'd been satisfied with bathroom renovations and kitchen additions. One review posted by a Mrs. Elaine Foster read, "Mr. Morrison rebuilt our kitchen after flood damage. Professional, honest, and did beautiful work. Would recommend to anyone." The librarian, a woman named Jessica who looked barely out of college, helped him print copies of everything they could find. "Are you applying for a job?" she asked kindly. "Something like that," Hank replied, not sure how to explain that he was trying to prove he deserved to keep a granddaughter he'd found by accident. When he returned to the station, Emma was awake and talking quietly to the sparrows, who had grown bold enough to perch on the bench beside her. She looked up as he approached, noting the folder of papers in his hands. "Are those important documents?" she asked, using the formal language that children employed when they sensed adult significance in something. "I hope so, sweetheart. They're supposed to help prove that I'm responsible enough to take care of you." Emma considered this with her characteristic seriousness. "Grandpa Hank, do you think the people who decide about kids understand what makes someone good at taking care of them?" "What do you mean?" "Like, Mr. Miller had all the right papers. He had a nice house and money and certificates on his wall, but he wasn't good at taking care of me. You don't have any of those things, but you're the best at taking care of me that anyone's ever been." Hank sat beside her on the bench, the folder balanced on his knees. "Sometimes the people who make decisions care more about rules than about people, but Miss Sarah seems different. She seems like she wants to understand what's really best for you." "I hope so, because what's best for me is staying with you." That evening, as they settled into their routine of shared dinner and quiet conversation, Emma's small voice broke through Hank's worried thoughts about tomorrow's deadlines and impossible requirements. "Grandpa Hank, can I tell you something that might help with your papers?" "Of course. My mama used to say that the most important thing about grown-ups wasn't what they owned or what job they had. It was whether they kept their promises and whether they made kids feel safe and whether they stayed even when things and got hard. Hank looked at this wise little girl who'd been teaching him about courage and family since the night he found her. Your mama sounds like she was very smart. She was. And she would have liked you because you keep your promises and you make me feel safe. And you stayed even when everything was hard and scary and we didn't know what would happen next. Emma, what if the court decides I'm not the right person to take care of you? What if they say you have to go live with someone else? Emma was quiet for a long moment, her small hand finding his. Then I'll be sad, but I'll remember everything you taught me. And I'll know that somewhere in the world there's a grandpa who chose me and loved me and made me feel like I mattered. You do matter, Emma. You matter more than anything. I know. And that's something I'll carry with me forever, no matter what happens tomorrow. As they prepared for what might be their last night together at the station, Hank realized that regardless of what the courts decided, Emma had already given him the greatest gift imaginable. She'd taught him how to be someone worth staying for. And in learning to be worthy of her trust, he discovered that he was worthy of his own second chance at life. It was Emma's small fingers finding something hidden in the torn lining of her jacket that changed everything. She'd been helping Hank organize their few possessions on Friday morning, 4 days before her emergency placement would expire, when her hand caught on something hard and small sewn into the fabric. "There's something in here," she said, her voice puzzled. Hank watched as she worked the object free, a small silver locket, tarnished and dented, hanging from a broken chain. Emma's face went pale as she recognized it. "Mama's necklace," she whispered. "I thought it was lost." With trembling fingers, she opened the heart-shaped pendant. Inside was a photograph so small, Hank had to squint to make out the details. A young woman holding a baby, both of them smiling at the camera. But it was the man standing behind them, his hand possessive on the woman's shoulder, that made Emma's breath catch. "That's not my daddy," she said quietly. "Who is it?" "Mr. Miller. But this picture, it's old, from before I was born, I think." Hank felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Emma, how did your mama get this necklace?" "She said it was from my daddy. She said he loved us both but couldn't stay." Emma's voice was barely audible. "She said someday he'd come back for us." The pieces of a horrifying puzzle began arranging themselves in Hank's mind. A young woman working night shifts at the hospital, a man who visited patients' rooms with authority and access, a child who looked nothing like her mother's gentle features but had Mike Miller's dark eyes and stubborn chin. "Emma, sweetheart, I need you to think carefully. Did your mama ever mention Mr. Miller before you went to live with him?" Emma shook her head, then stopped. "Wait, she used to have nightmares sometimes. She'd wake up saying, 'No, Mike, please.' I thought it was someone from a movie." Hank's hands clenched into fists. Mike Miller hadn't just been abusing foster children placed in his care. He'd been hunting his own biological daughter, using the system to get access to her, using his position of authority to silence her when she'd tried to tell the truth about their games. "Emma, I need to call Miss Sarah right now. This changes everything." But when he called Sarah Chen's office, he was told she was in court and wouldn't be available until Monday. The weekend stretched ahead of them like a minefield, 48 hours during which Mike Miller, realizing his time was running out, might decide to take matters into his own hands. Hank's instincts, dormant for years but not dead, began screaming warnings. They were too visible at the station, too predictable in their routines. If Miller was desperate enough, if he had enough to lose, he'd come looking for the evidence that could destroy him. "We need to be somewhere else tonight," Hank told Emma, as casually as he could manage. "Why? Sometimes it's good to see new places." Emma's two wise eyes studied his face. "Are we hiding?" He'd learned not to lie to her. "Yes." "From Mr. Miller?" "Yes." She nodded with the resignation of someone who'd spent most of her short life running from one form of danger or another. "Where will we go?" That was the question that had no good answer. They had no car, little money, and nowhere to go. that wouldn't leave them just as exposed. The homeless shelter would ask questions they couldn't answer. The church might offer sanctuary, but it would also mean involving Father Martinez in something that could become dangerous. It was Mrs. Chen who provided an unexpected solution. When Hank went to her store to buy supplies for their night away from the station, she took one look at his face and asked quietly, "You're in trouble. Not the kind of trouble you're thinking, but yes, the little girl. She's not safe where you've been staying." Hank hesitated, then decided that honesty might be their only option. Someone is looking for her, someone who hurt her before. Mrs. Chen nodded as if she'd been expecting this. "My David, my grandson, he was in foster care before he came to live with me. The stories he told." She shook her head. "There's a room above the store. It's small, but it has a lock on the door and a window that faces the back alley. Mrs. Chen, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm offering one night, maybe two, until you can figure out something better. If something happens, if we bring trouble. Trouble finds children whether we help them or not. At least this way, someone is watching." That evening, as darkness settled over Millfield, Hank and Emma climbed the narrow stairs behind Chen's. Market to a room that was indeed small, but felt like a palace, after nights spent on concrete platforms. There was a single bed with clean sheets, a small table, and a window that offered a clear view of anyone approaching the store. Emma curled up on the bed with her stuffed elephant, the silver locket clutched in her small fist. "Grandpa Hank?" "Yes." "Sweetheart, what if he finds us?" It was the question that had been haunting him since they discovered the photograph. Mike Miller was a police officer with resources and connections, someone who understood how to track people and how to use authority to get what he wanted. Against that, Hank had nothing but determination and the element of surprise. "Then I'll make sure nothing happens to you." "How?" The simple question that demanded a complex answer. How does a 68-year-old homeless man protect a 7-year-old? Girl from a corrupt cop with everything to lose? How do you fight a system from outside the system? How do you keep promises when keeping them might be impossible? "I don't know yet," Hank admitted, "but I'll figure it out." Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached for her backpack and pulled out the school photo of her mother. "Mama used to say that love makes people brave, even when they're scared, even when they don't know what to do. Love helps them find a way." Hank looked at the photograph, the tired young woman in scrubs, smiling despite everything, and felt something shift in his chest. Margaret had said something similar during her last weeks in the hospital. Not the sentimental version of love that appeared in movies, but the fierce, practical love that got you up in the morning when getting up seemed impossible, that helped. You endure pain when enduring it was the only option. Your mama was a smart woman. She was, and she loved me enough to hide this necklace where I'd find it when I needed it most. Emma held up the locket, its tarnished surface catching the light from the single bulb overhead. Maybe she knew I'd need proof someday. Maybe she did. "Grandpa Hank?" "Yes." "When people love each other, really love each other, do they become family even if they're not related?" The question that had been hovering unspoken between them for days, finally given voice by a 7-year-old who understood family better than most adults. "Yes," Hank said without hesitation. "They do. Then we're family." "Yes, we are." Emma smiled, the first genuinely happy expression he'd seen on her face since the morning with the sparrows. "Good, because families protect each other. They do. And they don't give up on each other. Never." She settled back against the pillow, the locket still clutched in her hand. "Then we'll figure it out together." Outside, the night sounds of the city continued. Traffic, distant music, the occasional siren. Normal sounds of a normal evening, except that nothing about their situation was normal. They were a homeless man and a traumatized child, hiding in a room above a corner store, trying to outwit a corrupt system with nothing but love and determination. But as Hank watched Emma drift off to sleep, her small face peaceful for the first time in days, he realized that sometimes love and determination were enough, not because they made you invincible, but because they made you willing to try impossible things. Saturday morning brought the sound of voices downstairs, urgent, authoritative, wrong. Hank woke instantly, his body remembering older reflexes from a time when sudden noises meant danger. Emma was already awake beside him, her eyes wide but alert, her small body tense with the readiness to run. Through the thin walls, they could hear Mrs. Chen speaking in careful, measured English. "No, officer, I haven't seen anyone matching that description. Ma'am, this is a missing child case. The girl is considered endangered, and the man with her is not authorized to have custody. If you're harboring them, I understand the seriousness. But I run a business here. Many people come and go. I cannot remember every face." Hank moved silently to the window that faced the back alley. Below, he could see a police cruiser parked next to the dumpster, and through the store's front window, the unmistakable figure of Mike Miller in civilian clothes, badge prominently displayed, speaking with manufactured urgency to Mrs. Chen. Missing child poster tucked under Miller's arm showed Emma's school photo alongside a description that painted Hank as a dangerous vagrant who'd kidnapped her. The bureaucratic language was clinical, official, and completely false, but it would be believed by anyone who didn't know the truth. Emma appeared beside him, silent as a ghost. "It's him," she whispered. Hank nodded, his mind already calculating distances, exit routes, possibilities. The back stairs led to the alley, but Miller would have thought of that. There might be another officer watching the rear of the building. "Emma, I need you to listen very carefully. Can you do that?" She nodded. "In about 30 seconds, I'm going to create a distraction. When I do, I want you to go down the back stairs, through the alley, and run to the old station. Don't look back. Don't. Wait for me. Just run. Can you remember that? What kind of distraction? The kind that might get me arrested, but it will give you time to get away." Emma's hand found his, small fingers gripping with surprising strength. "We said we'd figure it out together. Sometimes together means one person protects the other. And sometimes it means we're smarter than the bad people, because we care about each other and they only care about themselves." Despite everything, Hank almost smiled. This 7-year-old girl, traumatized and frightened, was still teaching him about courage. "What do you have in mind?" Emma pointed to the store's landline phone on the small table. "Mrs. Chen has been nice to us. What if we were nice to her?" Before Hank could ask what she meant, Emma had picked up the phone and dialed 911. "Hello?" Her voice was small, frightened, perfect. "My name is Emma Rodriguez, and there's a man here who says he's a police officer, but he's trying to take me back to the place where I got hurt. I'm scared." Hank watched through the window as Miller's posture changed, his head snapping up as if he'd heard something. The dispatcher's voice was audible even from across the room, asking Emma to stay on the line, asking for her location. "I'm at Chen's Market on Millbrook Avenue. The man's name is Mike Miller, and he hurt me when I lived at his house. I ran away because—" The line went dead. Miller had obviously figured out what was happening and cut the phone connection from downstairs. But Emma's call had accomplished something important. There was now an official record of her allegations, logged with emergency services, time-stamped and documented. "Smart girl," Hank murmured. "Mama taught me. She said when people use the system against you, sometimes you have to use the system right back." They could hear Miller's voice, rising downstairs, no longer the careful tone of official inquiry, but the sharp edge of someone whose plans had been disrupted. Mrs. Chen's responses remained steady, but there was tension now, the recognition that the situation had shifted into dangerous territory. "There's a fire escape," Emma said suddenly, pointing to the window that faced the side street. "I saw it when we came up last night." Hank looked where she indicated. The old metal framework was rusted but appeared solid, zigzagging down the side of the building to an alley that would put them 2 blocks from their original hiding spot. "Can you climb down by yourself?" I think so. Then let's go. The window opened with protest, old wood and metal groaning loud enough to wake the dead. Below them, the fire escape swayed slightly under Hank's weight, but it held. Emma moved with the agility of childhood, her small hands and feet finding purchase easily on rungs that challenged Hank's arthritic joints. They were halfway down when Miller appeared at the mouth of the alley, having circled the building exactly as Hank had predicted. For a moment, the three of them formed a bizarre tableau. The corrupt cop looking up, the homeless man and traumatized child looking down, nobody moving. Then Miller smiled, and Hank understood that they'd been herded exactly where he wanted them. "Emma," Miller called up, his voice switching to the false gentleness that predators used with prey. "Sweetheart, you don't need to be scared. I'm here to take you home." "This is my home now," Emma called back, her voice stronger than Hank had ever heard. With my family." "That man isn't your family, Emma. He's a stranger who took you away from people who love you." "You don't love me. You hurt me." Miller's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. "Emma, you're confused. You've been listening to stories that aren't true. Come down here and we'll talk about it." Instead, Emma continued, climbing down until she was close enough to jump the last few feet. She landed with practiced ease and immediately moved to stand behind Hank, her small hand gripping the back of his jacket. "Mr. Miller," Hank said, stepping forward to put himself between the man and the girl, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. You took a child from her legal placement, that's kidnapping. And you abused a child in your care, that's a felony. Prove it." The challenge hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Miller was right. Without Emma's testimony being taken seriously by the system, without corroboration from other victims, without evidence that would stand up in court, it was the word of a homeless man and a traumatized child against a police officer with an 8-year record of successful foster placements. But Emma stepped out from behind Hank, her small hand reaching into her jacket pocket. "I can prove it," she said, holding up the silver locket. Miller's face went white. "This is my mama's necklace, the one you gave her when you told her you loved her. The one with the picture of you and her and me when I was a baby." Emma's voice was steady, matter-of-fact, devastating. "Mama hid it where I'd find it someday. She knew I might need it. That doesn't prove anything. It proves you're my biological father. It proves you knew my mama before I was born. It proves you lied to the social workers when you said we were strangers." Emma took a step forward, no longer the frightened child, but something harder, more determined. "And when they test your DNA, it's going to prove a lot more." Miller's hand moved toward his weapon, and for a moment, Hank thought they were about to die in an alley behind a corner store, their story ending with violence and cover-ups. Instead, sirens filled the air. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Emma's 911 call had triggered exactly what she'd hoped. An emergency response to a child in danger, multiple units dispatched to verify the situation. Miller's hand dropped away from his gun. Whatever he'd been planning would have to wait for another opportunity, another time when there weren't witnesses and official protocols to follow. "This isn't over," he said quietly. His words directed at both of them, but his eyes fixed on Emma. "Yes, it is," she replied, "because now everyone's going to know who you really are." The first police car rounded the corner as Miller walked away, his posture that of a man who'd lost a battle but hadn't given up the war. Hank watched him go and realized that Emma was right. The game had changed completely. They were no longer hiding from a corrupt foster parent. They were fighting a man who had everything to lose and nothing left to lose it for. "Grandpa Hank?" Emma said, as officers approached them with hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be okay." "How can you be sure?" Emma held up the locket, its tarnished surface reflecting the morning sun. "Because truth is stronger than lies. And love is stronger than fear. Mama taught me that." As the officers reached them, Hank hoped she was right, because they were about to find out just how strong truth and love really were when tested against a system designed to protect people like Mike Miller and abandon people like them. The responding officers were young, professional, and completely unprepared for what they found. A 7-year-old girl articulating accusations of sexual abuse against a decorated police officer, backed by a homeless man whose only credentials were love and determination. Sergeant Maria Valdez, the senior officer on scene, had the weathered look of someone who'd seen enough to know that the most unlikely stories were often the truest ones. "Emma," she said, kneeling to the girl's eye level, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened, in your own words." Emma's response was delivered with the clear precision of someone who'd been preparing for this moment her entire short life. "Mike Miller is my biological father. He gave my mama this necklace when I was a baby. Then he abandoned us. When mama died, he used his job to get me placed in his foster home so he could hurt me. When I tried to tell the truth, he said nobody would believe a foster kid over a police officer. And this man," Valdez indicated Hank, "Grandpa Hank found me when I ran away. He kept me safe when nobody else would." Valdez studied the locket Emma held, the photograph inside, the resemblance between the child and the man who'd been hunting her. Her radio crackled with requests for updates, but she ignored them, focusing instead on the small girl who was unraveling what might be the biggest corruption case her department had seen. "Emma, these are very serious accusations. Do you understand that?" "Yes, Mom. I understand that Mr. Miller did serious things to me." The matter-of-fact delivery made Valdez wince. In her 15 years on the force, she'd seen too many children forced to grow up too fast, but Emma's composure was both heartbreaking and compelling. "I'm going to need you both to come to the station for formal statements," Valdez said. "And Emma, you'll be interviewed by specially trained detectives who know how to talk to children about difficult things. Will they believe me?" "Yes, I believe you." It was the first time in Emma's memory that an authority figure had said those words without qualification or hesitation. She looked up at Hank with something approaching wonder. "See," she whispered, "truth is stronger than lies." But as they were driven to the police station in separate cars, protocol, Valdez explained, to prevent any appearance of coaching or intimidation, Hank realized that belief and proof were different animals entirely. Emma's testimony was compelling, but Mike Miller had 8 years of stellar foster parent evaluations, commendations from the department, and the institutional credibility that came with wearing a badge. The interview room at the police station was deliberately non-threatening, soft lighting, comfortable chairs, toys in one corner that Emma ignored in favor of sitting straight-backed and alert at the small table. Detective Linda Torres, a specialist in crimes against children, had the rare gift of speaking to kids as equals while maintaining the authority necessary to elicit difficult truths. "Emma, before we start, I want you to know that you're safe. Here, no one can hurt you in this room, and no one can force you to go anywhere you don't want to go. Do you understand?" Emma nodded. "Good. Now, I need to ask you some questions that might be uncomfortable. If you need to stop at any time, just tell me. Okay? Okay." For the next 2 hours, Emma told her story with devastating clarity. The games that weren't games, the threats disguised as promises, the isolation from other children, the fear that kept her silent until silence became more dangerous than speaking. She described physical details that no 7-year-old should know, used words that should never appear in a child's vocabulary, painted a picture of systematic abuse by someone who'd used his authority to ensure compliance. Detective Torres took notes without visible reaction, her professional composure hiding what Hank imagined must be profound rage. When Emma finished, Torres reached across the table and squeezed her small hand. "Emma, you are the bravest person I've met in a very long time. Do you know that? Grandpa Hank says courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared." Grandpa Hank sounds very wise. While Emma's interview continued with a child psychologist, Hank found himself in a different room with Detective Ray Morrison, no relation despite the shared name, a veteran, investigator with intelligent eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd learned to let silence do most of the work. "Mr. Morrison," Detective Morrison began, "I want to start by saying that what you did, taking care of Emma, keeping her safe, took real courage. Not everyone would have made that choice. Anyone would have done the same. No, sir, they wouldn't. Most people would have called 911 and walked away. You stayed. That matters." Hank felt something ease in his chest that he hadn't realized was tight. She needed someone to stay. "Tell me about finding her." Hank recounted that first night. The rain, the unconscious child on the platform, the decision to share his only blanket. He described the slow building of trust, Emma's gradual revelation of her abuse, the bureaucratic maze that had made official help feel impossible. "And when did you realize Mike Miller was law enforcement?" "When I saw his badge yesterday." Everything clicked into place then, how he'd tracked us, why he felt so confident threatening a child, why the system had protected him for so long. Detective Morrison nodded. "We've been looking into Miller since your Emma made that 911 call. His record shows 8 years of successful foster placements, but when we started digging deeper, some patterns emerged. Children who were removed from his home for behavioral problems. Other kids who aged out of the system without ever talking about their time with the Millers. How many others? We're still finding out. But Emma's locket, that changes everything. If Miller is her biological father, if he used his position to gain access to her, if he's been abusing his own child." Morrison shook his head. "This becomes a federal case. FBI will want to interview everyone involved. What does that mean for Emma? It means she's going to be the most protected witness in the state. It also means this is going to take months, maybe years, to resolve. Fully, Emma's going to need stability, ongoing counseling, a safe place to heal." The unspoken question hung between them. Where did that leave a homeless man with no legal standing and no resources except love? "Detective Morrison, can I ask you something?" "Of course. In your experience, what happens to children like Emma after cases like this, after the trials and the testimony and the media attention dies down?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "The lucky ones find families who see them as more than their trauma, who help them remember that what happened to them doesn't define who they are. And the unlucky ones, they get lost in the system. They carry the damage alone. They never learn that they're worth protecting. Emma's worth protecting. I can see that. Question is, who's going to do the protecting?" It was the question Hank had been avoiding since the moment Emma had first called him Grandpa. He was 68 years old, homeless with no income and no prospects. He had a history of alcoholism, a failed business, and a strange daughter who probably wouldn't recognize him on the street. By any reasonable measure, he was the last person who should be trusted with a traumatized child. But Emma had chosen him, and he'd chosen her right back. "Detective, what would it take for someone like me to become someone like Emma's legal guardian?" Morrison's eyebrows rose. "You're talking about adoption, foster care licensing?" "I'm talking about family." "Mr. Morrison, Hank, I admire what you're trying to do, but the requirements for foster care licensing include background checks, home studies, financial stability, references. I don't have most of those things, I know. But I have the one thing that matters most. I love that little girl like she's my own granddaughter. And she loves me back." Morrison studied him for a long moment. "Sometimes that's enough to start with, but you'd need help. Legal advocacy, housing assistance, job training maybe. You'd need people willing to go to bat for you with the courts. Where would I find people like that? Sometimes they find you, when word gets out about what you did for Emma, when people hear this story." Morrison smiled slightly. "You might be surprised how many people want to help when they see someone doing the right thing for the right reasons." As if summoned by their conversation, there was a knock on the interview room door. Sergeant Valdez entered with Sarah Chen, and a woman Hank didn't recognize. middle-aged, professionally dressed, with the confident bearing of someone used to fighting institutional battles. "Mr. Morrison," Sarah Chen said, "I'd like you to meet Amanda Foster from the Children's Legal Advocacy Center. She's been following Emma's case since yesterday, and she has some things to discuss with you." Amanda Foster extended her hand with a firm grip and direct eye contact. "Mr. Morrison, I represent children in custody cases where the system has failed them. Emma's case is exactly why our organization exists." "I don't understand. We've been monitoring Mike Miller for 2 years, waiting for enough evidence to build a case. Emma's testimony, combined with the physical evidence of the locket and her DNA relationship to Miller, gives us everything we need. But more than that, your actions in protecting her demonstrate something the courts rarely see: an adult who puts a child's welfare above his own interests." "I just did what anyone would do." "No, Mr. Morrison, you didn't, and that's why I'm here to offer you legal representation in pursuing custody of Emma Rodriguez." Hank felt the world tilt slightly off its axis. I'm saying that if you want to fight for the right to raise Emma, we'll help you fight. It won't be easy, and there are no guarantees. But sometimes impossible things become possible when the right people refuse to give up. Through the interview room's small window, Hank could see Emma in the hallway, talking animatedly to Detective Torres, her small hands moving as she explained something important. She looked up and caught his eye through the glass, smiling with a confidence he'd never seen in her before. "What would I need to do?" Amanda Foster opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "First, we get you stable housing. Second, we get you employment or disability benefits, whatever applies to your situation. Third, we surround you with character witnesses and support systems. And then we go to court and argue that Emma Rodriguez belongs with the man who risked everything to keep her safe. And if we lose, then we appeal. And if we lose the appeal, we fight in the media. And if we lose in the media, we take it to federal court. Because, Mr. Morrison, there are some fights worth having even if you might lose them. Why would you do this for us? Because in 20 years of family law, I've learned that the system usually gets it wrong when it comes to what children actually need. Emma doesn't need perfect parents or perfect circumstances. She needs someone who will stay. And you, Mr. Morrison, are someone who stays." Hank looked again through the window at Emma, who was now drawing a picture for Detective Torres, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. She looked like any normal 7-year-old girl, except for the 2 wise eyes and the way she positioned herself near the door, ready to run if running became necessary. "When do we start?" "We already have," Amanda Foster said. "Welcome to the fight for Emma's future." The transformation began immediately. Within hours of Amanda Foster's arrival, Hank found himself at the center of a network he hadn't known existed. Advocates, social workers, lawyers, and activists who specialized in fighting for the forgotten. Children that bureaucracy left behind. Father Martinez arrived at the police station as the sun set over the city, his presence both surprising and somehow inevitable. The elderly priest had worked the streets for 40 years, ministering to those whom society had abandoned, and his weathered face carried the wisdom of someone who'd seen both the worst and best of humanity. "Henry Morrison," he said, using Hank's full name with the authority of someone who remembered him from a different life. "I heard you found yourself a granddaughter." "Father Martinez." Hank stood, uncertain how to greet a man who'd last seen him drunk and belligerent at Margaret's funeral 12 years ago. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me." "I remember everyone who comes to me in pain. I also remember everyone who finds their way back from that pain to something better." The priest's eyes were kind but uncompromising. "Amanda Foster tells me you want to adopt the child." "Yes, Father, and you understand what that means? The responsibility, the commitment, the sacrifice?" "I understand that Emma needs someone who won't abandon her. I understand that I'd rather die than let anything else bad happen to her." Father Martinez nodded slowly. "Then you understand what love requires. Good, because what comes next will test every bit of resolve you have. Over the following days, Hank discovered that fighting for Emma's future was like learning an entirely new language, one written in legal briefs and psychological evaluations, home studies and background checks, character witnesses and court filings. Amanda Foster guided him through the maze with the patient expertise of someone who'd navigated similar battles hundreds of times. The good news, she explained during one of their evening meetings at her downtown office, is that Mike Miller's arrest has blown this case wide open. 3 other victims have come forward since Emma's testimony went public. The FBI is treating this as a racketeering case, using his position as a law enforcement officer to commit crimes against children. What's the bad news? The bad news is that the system doesn't know what to do with you. You're not a traditional foster family. You don't fit any of the approved categories. And some very powerful people are going to argue that a homeless man with a history of alcoholism has no business raising a traumatized child, no matter how noble his intentions. The character witnesses Amanda assembled painted a picture of Hank that surprised even him. Mrs. Chen testified about his gentleness with Emma, his respect for others, his quiet dignity in the face of hardship. Detective Torres spoke about his protective instincts and willingness to sacrifice for a child's welfare. Even Sergeant Valdez, who barely knew him, appeared before the family court judge to describe the scene at the alley, a man placing himself between a child and danger without hesitation. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. David Chen, Mrs. Chen's grandson, now 23, and working as a social worker himself. "Your Honor," David said, "during the preliminary hearing, I aged out of foster care at 18 with nothing but the clothes on my back and a garbage bag full of possessions. I know what it's like when adults see you as a case file instead of a person. Mr. Morrison doesn't see Emma as a problem to be managed. He sees her as a granddaughter to be loved. And how do you know this, Mr. Chen? Because I've watched them together for 2 weeks. I've seen how she looks at him. Not with the careful politeness kids use with foster parents they don't trust, but with the real affection children reserve for family. And I've seen how he looks at her, not like she's damaged or difficult, but like she's precious exactly as she is." The testimony was powerful, but Amanda Foster warned Hank that testimonials alone wouldn't be enough. The state required concrete evidence of stability, housing, income, support systems. Without those foundations, even the most compelling emotional arguments would fail. It was Father Martinez who provided the first piece of the puzzle. St. Vincent's Parish had a transitional housing program for people recovering from homelessness, small apartments on the church grounds that offered dignity and privacy while providing support services. "The apartment has 2 bedrooms, Father Martinez explained, as he showed Hank through the modest but clean space. "One for you, one for Emma. Kitchen, living room, bathroom with a tub, everything a family needs to start over." "Father, I can't afford rent. I don't have income. The program is funded by donations. Your rent would be 20% of whatever income you have. If you have no income, your rent is volunteer work around the parish, maintenance, helping in the food pantry, whatever matches your skills." Hank walked through the small rooms, imagining Emma's drawings on the refrigerator, her stuffed elephant on the 2nd bedroom's single bed, the sound of her laughter filling spaces that had been empty for too long. "Why would you do this for us?" "Because 12 years ago, a broken man came to his wife's funeral drunk and angry at God. I could have had him removed. Instead, I let him rage and grieve and find his way to whatever peace he could manage. Sometimes the church's job isn't to judge. Sometimes it's just to provide a place where people can heal." The second piece came from an unexpected collaboration between Sarah Chen and Detective Morrison. The police department had a victim advocacy program that provided ongoing support for families affected by crimes. Emma qualified for counseling, services, educational support, and even a modest monthly stipend to help with her care. It's not much, Sarah admitted during one of their case planning meetings. But it's enough to establish that you have legitimate income related to Emma's. Care. Combined with whatever part-time work you can manage, it should meet the court's financial stability requirements. The part-time work materialized through another connection Amanda Foster had cultivated over years of fighting similar battles. Morrison Construction might be dead, but Hank's skills weren't. The Riverside Community Center needed a maintenance supervisor, someone who could fix leaky pipes, repair broken playground equipment, and handle the dozens of small projects that kept a busy neighborhood facility running. 20 hours a week to start, explained the center's director, Maria Santos, a woman whose own childhood in foster care had led her to dedicate her life to helping vulnerable families. Flexible schedule so you can attend Emma's appointments and court dates, and if things work out, if the adoption goes through, we can discuss expanding your hours. Why are you willing to take a chance on me? Maria smiled. Because Amanda Foster vouched for you, and because this community center exists to prove that people deserve second chances. Seems like you and Emma both qualify. But it was Emma herself who provided the most crucial element of their case. During her psychological evaluation with Dr. Patricia Williams, a court-appointed child psychologist, Emma demonstrated remarkable resilience and clarity about what she wanted. Emma, Dr. Williams asked gently, can you tell me what family means to you? Family means someone stays even when things are hard. Someone who keeps you safe not because it's their job, but because they love you. Someone who remembers how you like your sandwiches and what makes you have bad dreams, and that you're afraid of thunder but not of lightning. And Grandpa Hank, Mr. Morrison, he does those things for you. He does all of those things. He also taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. What would happen if you couldn't live with Grandpa Hank? Emma was quiet for a long moment, her small hands folded in her lap. I would be very sad, but I would understand because grown-ups make decisions that kids don't get to choose. And I would try to remember everything he taught me about being brave and kind and not giving up on people you love. And if you could choose, if it was completely up to you, I would choose to stay with my family because that's what he is, my family. Not because of blood or papers or rules, but because we chose each other. Dr. Williams included Emma's words verbatim in her report, along with her professional assessment. This child demonstrates remarkable emotional intelligence and a clear understanding of healthy family dynamics. Her attachment to Mr. Morrison appears secure, age-appropriate, and therapeutic. In my professional opinion, continuing this relationship would be in Emma's best interests. The network of support continued to expand in ways that astonished Hank. Mrs. Chen organized a letter-writing campaign among local business owners, each one attesting to his character and reliability. Detective Torres reached out to former construction clients whose contact information she'd tracked down through old business records, many of whom remembered Hank as honest, skilled, and dependable. Even David Chen's former foster families provided statements about what they'd observed in children who'd been genuinely loved versus those who'd merely been housed. But perhaps the most surprising support came from an entirely unexpected source. Sarah Morrison, Hank's estranged daughter, who appeared at Amanda Foster's office on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks after the case began. I read about what Dad did in the newspaper, she said without preamble. About the little girl he's trying to adopt. Amanda studied the young woman, 32 now, with her father's eyes and her mother's determined chin. And I want to help. Sarah, Hank said, his voice hoarse with emotion he couldn't quite name. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Because the man who saved that little girl, that's the father I remember from before Mom got sick, before everything fell apart. That's the man who taught me how to ride a bike and helped me with algebra and told me bedtime stories about brave princesses who saved themselves. She pulled out a folder thick with documents. I've been clean and sober for 8 years. I have a good job, a stable home, excellent credit. I can be a character witness, a backup guardian if anything happens to you, whatever the court needs, to see that Emma would have family support. Why now? Sarah's smile was sad but genuine. Because Mom always said that love wasn't about keeping score of who hurt whom. It was about showing up when it mattered. And this matters, Dad. This little girl matters. The man you've become for her, that matters too. As the court date approached, Hank realized that what had started as one homeless man trying to protect one abandoned child had become something much larger. A community of people who understood that family wasn't about biology or bureaucracy, but about the decision to stay present in someone else's life, even when it was difficult. Are you ready for this? Amanda Foster asked him the night before the final hearing. Hank looked around the small apartment that had become home, at Emma's drawings covering the refrigerator, at the case files spread across their kitchen table, at the faces of people who'd become family not through blood but through choice. No, he said honestly, but I'm ready to try. And Emma's ready to be loved the way every child deserves to be loved, completely, permanently, without conditions. Then let's go fight for your family. Outside their window, the lights of the city twinkled like earthbound stars, each one representing someone's home, someone's family, someone's chance at happiness. Tomorrow a judge would decide whether Hank and Emma would get their chance too. But tonight they were already home. The family courthouse on Elm Street had seen thousands of custody battles, but few had drawn the media attention that surrounded Emma Rodriguez's case. News vans lined the sidewalk, reporters thrust microphones at anyone who looked official, and the phrase "homeless hero" had become shorthand for a story that was far more complex than any headline could capture. Emma sat between Hank and Amanda Foster at the plaintiff's table, wearing a new blue dress that Sarah had bought for her, the same blue as the flowers on her torn original dress, but clean and whole and carefully chosen to make her feel confident. Her hair was braided with small white ribbons, and she clutched her stuffed elephant in one hand while holding Hank's weathered fingers with the other. "Remember what we talked about," Amanda whispered to Emma as Judge Patricia Caldwell entered the courtroom. "You tell the truth, you speak clearly, and you remember that everyone here wants what's best for you." Judge Caldwell was a woman in her 50s who'd spent 20 years in family court, her grey hair pulled back in a practical bun, and her expression carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too many children failed by adults who should have protected them. She surveyed the packed courtroom with mild surprise. Custody hearings rarely drew audiences before focusing her attention on the case files spread before her. This is the matter of Rodriguez versus the state regarding the custody petition, filed by Henry Morrison for minor child Emma Rodriguez. Her voice carried the formal precision of legal proceedings, but her eyes were kind when they settled on Emma. "I've reviewed the preliminary reports, and I want to begin by acknowledging the unusual circumstances that have brought us here." She gestured toward the defendant's table, where the state's attorney, Michael Davidson, sat alone. Mike Miller, the man at the center of the case, was conspicuously absent, sitting in a federal detention facility, awaiting trial on charges that had grown to include racketeering, child abuse, and corruption. "Mr. Davidson, the state's position." Davidson rose, a thin man in his 40s who'd clearly drawn the short straw on this case. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge Mr. Morrison's good intentions in protecting Emma Rodriguez, the state maintains that proper procedures must be followed in matters of child custody. Mr. Morrison has not completed the standard foster care certification process, has no permanent housing history, and lacks the financial resources typically required for adoption proceedings. And the state's recommendation for Emma's placement? Temporary custody with the Henderson family, while Mr. Morrison completes the certification process, followed by a reassessment in 6 months. Emma's grip on Hank's hand tightened. They'd met the Henderson family, Kind people, certainly, but strangers who saw her as another placement in their long history of foster care. The kind of people who meant well, but didn't understand that. Being grateful for basic care wasn't the same as being loved. Miss Foster, your client's position? Amanda Foster stood with the confidence of someone who'd fought similar battles for 20 years. Your Honor, we're asking the court to recognize that family is not defined by paperwork or financial statements, but by love, commitment, and demonstrated care. Mr. Morrison has provided Emma with stability, safety, and genuine family bonds during the most traumatic period of her life. And you're prepared to demonstrate that Mr. Morrison can provide long-term stability? We are, Your Honor. Judge Caldwell nodded. Then let's proceed with testimony. Mr. Davidson, call your first witness. The state's case was methodical and predictable. A caseworker testified about standard foster care procedures. A financial analyst explained minimum income requirements for adoptive families. A bureaucrat from Child Protective Services outlined the systematic approach to child placement that was designed to ensure proper vetting of potential parents. Each witness acknowledged that Hank had protected Emma, that he'd kept her safe when the system had failed her, but they maintained that good intentions weren't sufficient for permanent custody. The state's argument was clinical, reasonable, and completely divorced from the emotional reality of a 7-year-old girl who'd finally found someone who stayed. Your Honor, Davidson concluded after his final witness, we're not questioning Mr. Morrison's character or his genuine care for Emma, but the law exists to protect children from well-meaning adults who lack the resources to provide long-term stability. We respectfully request that Emma be placed with certified foster parents while Mr. Morrison completes the proper procedures. Judge Caldwell made notes, her expression giving nothing away. Ms. Foster, present your case. Amanda's first witness was Dr. Patricia Williams, the child psychologist whose evaluation had been crucial to their preparation. Dr. Williams took the stand with the calm authority of someone whose expertise was rarely questioned. Dr. Williams, Amanda began, in your professional opinion, what would be the psychological impact on Emma if she were separated from Mr. Morrison at this time? It would be devastating, Dr. Williams replied without hesitation. Emma has formed a secure attachment with Mr. Morrison, the first healthy parental bond she's experienced since her mother's death. Disrupting that relationship now, particularly given her history of abandonment trauma, could cause significant psychological regression. And if she were to remain with Mr. Morrison, based on my evaluation, I believe Emma would continue to heal and develop in a healthy manner. Mr. Morrison provides her with consistent emotional support, clear boundaries, and unconditional love. These are the essential elements of successful child-rearing, regardless of economic status. Davidson's cross-examination was aggressive but ineffective. Dr. Williams had 30 years of experience and had clearly anticipated every question about financial stability, formal training, and systematic approaches to child welfare. Doctor, don't you think it's irresponsible to recommend placing a traumatized child with someone who was homeless just weeks ago? Mr. Davidson, homelessness is a housing status, not a character defect. Mr. Morrison's temporary lack of housing does not negate his demonstrated ability to prioritize Emma's needs above his own comfort and safety. Amanda's second witness was Detective Linda Torres, who testified about Emma's initial disclosure and her observations of the relationship between child and caregiver. Detective Torres, in your experience with child abuse cases, how would you characterize Emma's behavior with Mr. Morrison? It's exactly what we hope to see in a child who's found safety. She's relaxed around him. She initiates physical contact. She looks to him for comfort and guidance. These are signs of healthy attachment, not the hypervigilance we typically observe in children who don't trust their caregivers. But it was Sarah Morrison whose testimony transformed the courtroom atmosphere. Hank's daughter took the stand with quiet dignity. her professional attire and composed demeanor presenting a stark contrast to the broken family dynamics Davidson had tried to establish. "Ms. Morrison," Amanda said gently, "can you tell the court about your relationship with your father? It was complicated for many years. When my mother died, Dad struggled with alcoholism, and I had to protect myself by maintaining distance. But the man I see with Emma, that's the father I remember from before grief and addiction changed him. What do you observe between your father and Emma?" Sarah's voice grew warmer. "I see a man who's found his purpose again. Dad looks at Emma the way he used to look at me when I was small, like I was the most precious thing in his world. And Emma looks at him with complete trust, the kind of trust children only give to adults who've proven themselves safe. Are you prepared to support your father in raising Emma?" "Absolutely. I want to be Emma's big sister. I want her to have the family stability that Dad and I lost when Mom died. We all deserve second chances, Your Honor. Dad deserves the chance to be the grandfather he always should have been, and Emma deserves to be someone's granddaughter, not just another case file." As Sarah stepped down from the witness stand, Emma tugged on Hank's sleeve. "Can I talk to the judge now?" she whispered. Amanda leaned over. "Emma, honey, you don't have to testify unless you want to." "I want to. I need to tell her something important." Judge Caldwell looked at the small girl with gentle attention. "Emma, would you like to speak to the court?" Emma nodded solemnly and walked to the witness stand with the measured pace of someone much older. The bailiff brought a cushion so she could reach the microphone, and she looked directly at Judge Caldwell with the unflinching honesty that had characterized everything she'd said since that first night at the station. "Your Honor," Emma began, her voice clear and strong, "I know that grown-ups have to make decisions about kids, and sometimes those decisions don't feel good to the kids, but they're still the right decisions." Judge Caldwell leaned forward slightly. "Go on, Emma. But I also know the difference between someone who takes care of you because it's their job and someone who takes care of you because they love you. Grandpa Hank loves me, not because anyone told him to, not because anyone's paying him to, but because we're family." Emma's small hands gripped the edges of the witness stand as she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I lived with the Millers for 4 months, and every day I was scared. I lived in 3 other foster homes before that, and they were okay, but I always knew I might have to leave. With Grandpa Hank, I'm not scared anymore. I know he's going to stay." Judge Caldwell's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes had shifted. "Emma, can you tell me what makes you feel safe with Mr. Morrison? He listens to me. When I have bad dreams, he doesn't tell me they're not real. He tells me that dreams can't hurt me, and that he's right there if I need him. When I'm hungry, he gives me his food even if he's hungry too. When I was scared of Mr. Miller, he put himself between us, even though Mr. Miller is bigger and stronger and had a badge. And what do you hope happens today?" Emma looked directly at Hank, her brown eyes serious and clear. "I hope the judge understands that families aren't just about having money or big houses or the right papers. I hope she understands that sometimes the best families are the ones that choose each other." She paused, then added with the devastating honesty of childhood, "And I hope I get to keep my grandpa because he's the only grown-up who ever kept all his promises to me." Davidson's cross-examination was brief and uncomfortable. Questioning a 7-year-old abuse survivor required delicacy, and Emma's composure made any aggressive approach look cruel. "Emma, you've been through some very difficult experiences. Don't you think you might feel differently about Mr. Morrison's ability to care for you if you had more time to consider other options?" Emma tilted her head, considering the question with characteristic seriousness. "Mr. Davidson, when you're drowning, you don't ask the person who pulls you out of the water if they have the right swimming certificate. You just say thank you and try not to drown again." The courtroom was completely silent for a moment before Judge Caldwell spoke. "Thank you, Emma. You may step down." Amanda's final witness was Hank himself, And as he walked to the stand, Emma gave him an encouraging nod that steadied his nerves better than any legal preparation could have. "Mr. Morrison," Amanda began, "can you tell the court why you want to adopt Emma?" Hank looked at the packed courtroom, at the reporters with their notepads, at Emma sitting between Sarah and Father Martinez, and felt the weight of everything that had led to this moment. "Because she's my granddaughter," he said. "Simply. Not by blood, not by law, but by choice. Because when I found her on that station platform, something in me recognized something in her. Two people who'd been forgotten by the world, who needed each other to remember what family felt like. Are you prepared for the long-term responsibilities of raising a child who's experienced significant trauma?" "No," Hank admitted. "I'm not prepared for a lot of things that come with being a parent, but I'm prepared to learn. I'm prepared to get up every morning and figure out what Emma needs that day. I'm prepared to stay, no matter how difficult things get." "Mr. Morrison, you've struggled with alcoholism in the past. How can the court be certain you won't relapse under the stress of parenthood?" "You can't be certain. I can't be certain. But I can tell you that in the weeks since Emma came into my life, I haven't had a single moment where I wanted to drink. I've had moments where I was scared, where I felt overwhelmed, where I didn't know what I was doing. But every one of those moments made me want to be better for her, not escape from her." Davidson's cross-examination was more aggressive, focusing on financial concerns, housing stability, and the unconventional nature of Hank's qualification as a guardian. "Mr. Morrison, you were living on the streets just weeks ago. What makes you think you can provide stability for a child?" "Because stability isn't about having money or a perfect house. It's about showing up every day, being present for someone who needs you, and proving through your actions that they matter more than your own comfort. But don't you think Emma deserves better than a grandfather figure with no resources and no formal training in child care?" Hank was quiet for a moment, considering the question that went to the heart of everything. "Mr. Davidson, I think Emma deserves what every child deserves, to be loved unconditionally, to feel safe, to know that someone in this world sees her as precious and irreplaceable. The Henderson family might be able to give her a bigger house and more opportunities, but they can't give her what I can give her. And what's that? The knowledge that she saved my life just as much as I saved hers. The understanding that family isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose to build, one day at a time, with people who matter to you." When testimony concluded, Judge Caldwell announced a brief recess to consider her decision. The courtroom buzzed with quiet conversations as Emma returned to sit beside Hank, her small hand finding his automatically. "Whatever happens," Emma whispered, "you're still my grandpa." "Whatever happens," Hank whispered back, "you're still my granddaughter." When court reconvened, Judge Caldwell's expression was unreadable as she reviewed her notes one final time. "This case has presented the court with an unusual situation," she began. "We have a child who has been failed repeatedly by the system designed to protect her, and we have an adult who stepped outside that system to provide protection when formal channels failed." She looked directly at Emma, then at Hank. "The state's concerns about Mr. Morrison's qualifications are not without merit. Foster care certification exists for good reasons, and financial stability is typically a prerequisite for adoption proceedings." Hank felt his heart begin to sink. "However," Judge Caldwell continued, "this court's primary responsibility is to determine what serves the best interests of the child. And the evidence presented today demonstrates clearly that Emma Rodriguez's best interests are served by remaining with Henry Morrison." The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration as the judge continued. "Dr. Williams's psychological evaluation confirms that separating Emma from Mr. Morrison at this time would cause significant trauma. Detective Torres's testimony establishes that their relationship exhibits all the markers of healthy family attachment. And most importantly, Emma herself has articulated with remarkable clarity exactly what she needs to continue healing and thriving. Judge Caldwell smiled slightly as she delivered her final ruling. Therefore, this court grants Henry Morrison's petition for adoption. Custody of Emma Rodriguez is awarded to Mr. Morrison, with the understanding that he will continue to work with social services to complete any outstanding certification requirements. Emma launched herself into Hank's arms as the gavel came down, tears streaming down both their faces. Around them, the courtroom filled with applause from supporters who'd become family, from reporters who'd been covering a story but had found themselves witnessing something much more profound. "We did it, Grandpa," Emma whispered against his neck. "No, sweetheart," Hank replied, his voice thick with emotion. "We became it. We became a family." Sarah was the first to reach them, wrapping both Emma and her father in an embrace that bridged 12 years of separation and hurt. "Welcome to the family, Emma," she said. "I can't wait to be your big sister." As they left the courthouse together, Hank carrying Emma, Sarah walking beside them, followed by Amanda Foster and Father Martinez and Mrs. Chen and all the other people who'd helped make this moment possible. The media called out questions about their plans, their feelings, their hopes for the future, but Hank had already answered the only question that mattered. When a little girl had needed someone to stay, he'd stayed. And now, surrounded by the family they'd chosen and built and fought for, they were both finally home. 1 year later, the abandoned Millfield Station bore little resemblance to the place where Hank had once sought shelter from more than just the weather. The old platform had been transformed into the Millfield Community Center, its restored brick walls now housing after-school programs, senior services, and a resource center for homeless families. The faded schedule board had been preserved as a historical marker, but new signs now pointed toward classrooms, meeting rooms, and offices that buzzed with purposeful activity. Emma Rodriguez Morrison sat on the same bench where she'd once fed. Breadcrumbs to sparrows, but now she wore a school uniform and carried a backpack filled with homework and art projects, and the confident possessions of a child who knew she belonged somewhere. Her dark hair was longer now, pulled back in 2 neat braids, and the too-wise expression in her eyes had softened into something more appropriate for an 8-year-old. "Tell me again about the first night," she said to Hank, who was adjusting a loose board on the bench with the methodical care of someone who took pride in maintaining beautiful things. "You know the story, sweetheart." "I like hearing it anyway." Hank set down his tools and looked at his granddaughter, legally, officially, and completely his granddaughter now, with the same wonder that struck him every morning when she padded into the kitchen, asking about breakfast and what they were doing that day. "I was sitting right here, feeling sorry for myself, when I saw a small bundle on the platform that turned out to be the most important person I'd ever meet. Was I really unconscious? Completely. Scared me half to death. I thought—" He paused, remembering those terrifying minutes when he'd feared he was too late, that the cold had already claimed her. "I thought I might have lost you before I even found you." Emma leaned against his side with the comfortable affection of someone who'd never doubted she was loved. "But you didn't lose me." "No, I didn't. Best night of my life, finding you. Even though it was cold and scary, especially because it was cold and scary. The best things in life usually come wrapped in difficulty. They test whether you really want them." Through the center's large windows, they could see the afternoon art class in session, a dozen children Emma's age working on paintings that would soon cover every available wall space. Emma's own artwork was prominently displayed near the main entrance, a watercolor of 2 figures holding hands under a rainbow, the same image she'd carried in her backpack that first night, but now painted with the confidence of a child who understood that some dreams did come true. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her professional attire exchanged for jeans and a community center volunteer t-shirt. She'd been promoted to Regional Social Services Supervisor 6 months ago, but still, spent her Saturdays at the center, working with families who reminded her of her own complicated journey toward healing. "Dad, Emma, you've got visitors," she said, smiling in a way that suggested good surprises. The visitors turned out to be Detective Linda Torres and Dr. Patricia Williams, both of whom had become regular fixtures in the Morrison family's life. Detective Torres had been promoted to head the new Crimes Against Children unit, while Dr. Williams had begun consulting with the center's trauma counseling program. "We have news," Detective Torres announced, settling into one of the comfortable chairs that furnished the center's main gathering space. "Mike Miller's sentencing hearing is next week. The prosecutor thinks he'll get 25 to life." Emma nodded solemnly. The trial had been difficult but necessary, her testimony helping to convict not only Miller, but 3 other corrupt officials who'd enabled his crimes. The case had led to sweeping reforms in the foster care system and new protocols for investigating abuse allegations. "Are you okay talking about this, Emma?" Dr. Williams asked gently. "I'm okay. Mr. Miller can't hurt anyone else now, and that's important." "And how are you doing with everything else? School, friends, adjusting to your new life?" Emma considered the question with her characteristic seriousness. "Sometimes I still have bad dreams. Sometimes I worry that good things don't last forever. But Grandpa Hank says that's normal, and we talk about it, and I remember that I'm safe now. What helps the most when you have those worries?" Emma pointed toward the wall, where a dozen family photos were displayed. Pictures of birthday parties and holiday celebrations, ordinary moments made extraordinary by the love that surrounded them. In the center was the newest addition, Emma's official adoption photo. All 3 Morrisons grinning at the camera with joy that couldn't be contained. Looking at the pictures helps, and knowing that even if something happened to Grandpa Hank, I have Sarah too, and Father Martinez and Mrs. Chen and all the people who chose to be our family. That's a very wise way to think about it," Dr. Williams said. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Chen and her grandson David, both carrying bags that smelled like heaven and looked like celebration. "Saturday dinner," Mrs. Chen announced, beginning to unpack containers of homemade dumplings, stir-fried vegetables, and Emma's favorite sweet and sour soup. "And we have special news to share." David grinned as he helped his grandmother arrange the food. "I got the job, starting next month as program coordinator here at the center." The announcement triggered a round of congratulations and hugs, Emma throwing her arms around David with the enthusiasm of someone who understood that good news was meant to be shared with family. "Does this mean you'll be here every day?" she asked. "Every day. We'll get to work together on the youth mentorship program we talked about." Emma had been instrumental in designing the mentorship program, insisting that older children who'd experienced trauma should help younger children navigate similar challenges. Her own experience had taught her that healing happened faster when you had someone who understood your story. As they settled around the large table for dinner, Emma looked around at the faces of the people who'd chosen to be her family. There was Hank, whose weathered hands now bore small scars from his maintenance work, but whose eyes held a peace that hadn't been there a year ago. Sarah, whose laughter came more easily now that she'd reconnected with her father and gained a sister she'd never expected. Mrs. Chen and David, whose quiet kindness had provided sanctuary when they'd needed it most. Detective Torres and Dr. Williams, who'd fought to ensure that Emma's voice was heard and believed. "Can I say something before we eat?" Emma asked. Everyone turned toward her expectantly. "I want to thank everyone for choosing us. Grandpa Hank always says that family isn't about who you're related to. It's about who shows up when you need them. You all showed up for us, and now we get to show up for other people too." She gestured toward the windows where they could see other families using the center's services. Parents attending GED classes, teenagers getting homework help, seniors participating in exercise programs, homeless families connecting with resources that could help them rebuild their lives. This place exists because we all learned that broken things can be fixed if enough people care about fixing them. And broken people can heal if they have other people who help them remember that they're worth healing. Hank reached for Emma's hand, his throat tight with emotion. A year ago, he'd been a man with nothing to live for, sleeping on concrete platforms and counting coins to buy day-old bread. Now he was a grandfather, a community center supervisor, a man whose life had meaning because a little girl had needed someone to stay. "Emma," he said quietly, "you saved my life. You saved mine first. I think we saved each other." Emma smiled, the expression transforming her face from serious to radiant. That's what families do. As they shared their meal in the renovated station that had once sheltered their desperation and now housed their hope, Emma pulled out a piece of paper she'd been saving for this moment. It was a letter, written in her careful third-grade handwriting, addressed to her mother. "Dear Mama," she read aloud, her voice steady and clear. "I wanted you to know that I found the family you always said was waiting for me. Grandpa Hank is kind and patient, and he makes the best pancakes in the world. Sarah is my big sister now, and she teaches me things and takes me to movies. We have a home with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen where we cook together and a living room where we read books every night." She paused, looking around the table at faces that had become as familiar as her own reflection. "I know you can't write back, but I wanted you to know that I remember everything you taught me about love and kindness and being brave. I use those lessons every day to help other kids who are scared like I was. And Mama, I'm not scared anymore. I'm home." Emma folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into her pocket. Outside, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reflected off the station's restored windows. Inside, a family that had chosen each other sat around a table, sharing food and stories, and the comfortable silence of people who belonged together. The old schedule board on the wall no longer listed trains that would never come. Instead, it displayed the week's activities. Story time for preschoolers, job skills workshops for adults, support groups for families in crisis, art classes for anyone who needed beauty in their lives. The destinations were different now, but the promise remained the same. Journeys toward better places, toward hope, toward home. Emma excused herself from the table and walked to the window that faced the platform where Hank had found her. The evening light caught the glass, and for a moment she could see her reflection superimposed over the view outside, past and present layered together like pages in a book she was still writing. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" Hank asked, joining her at the window. "I'm thinking about how many kids there are right now who are scared and alone, like I was, and how maybe some of them will find their way here, to people who will help them remember that they're worth staying for." Hank followed her gaze to the platform, remembering that stormy October night when his only purpose had been surviving until morning. Now he woke each day with more purpose than he'd ever imagined possible, not just as Emma's grandfather, but as someone whose story might help other forgotten people believe that transformation was possible. "Do you think we should put a plaque out there," Emma asked, "where you found me, to remind people that sometimes the most important things happen in places nobody's paying attention to?" "What would it say?" Emma was quiet for a moment, then smiled with the wisdom of someone who'd learned that endings could also be beginnings. It would say, "Here, love was stronger than fear. Here, 2 people chose each other and became family. Here, broken things learned to heal." Hank nodded, imagining the small bronze marker that would commemorate not just their story, but the countless other stories of resilience and hope that played out in forgotten corners of the world every day. "I think that's perfect. Emma, just like you, just like us," she corrected, taking his hand as they turned back toward their chosen family, toward the dinner that was waiting, toward the home they'd built from nothing but love and determination and the radical decision to stay present in each other's lives. Behind them, the last light of day faded from the platform, where a homeless man had once found a freezing little girl. Ahead of them stretched all the tomorrows they'd earned through their courage to choose hope over despair, family over solitude, love over fear. They were home. They were family. They were exactly where they belonged.